So why don't we start with, in your words, the best way to explain the difference between a centralized exchange and what decentralized exchanges unlock?
Well, one's good, one's not so good. No, I'm kidding. But a centralized exchange obviously is just one that is beholden to whatever the governing body around them, makes them do, right? And that includes, KYCing, which means know your customer, identifying who you are as an individual, documenting what you're trading, when you're trading, how much you're trading, and kind of invading your private space. And a decentralized exchange is kind of the inverse of that in some sense. It's not owned or operated by anybody, at least it shouldn't be. If it is, it's not a decentralized exchange. And it's not really beholden necessarily to any particular governing body per se, other than the community itself. So it oftentimes for me it's a requirement in order to have this space where we all value self-sovereignty and liberty and these kinds of ideals. If you require a centralized exchange to get in and out of, Bitcoin, for example, well, that kind of defeats the point of Bitcoin to some extent. And so I think that's one of the reasons why Thorchain is so unique and such a significant value proposition for the entire industry, is that it's the only one that allows you to trade in any kind of real volume in and out of Bitcoin and other layer one ecosystems that have been largely just forgotten about or ignored from a DeFi perspective.
That's kind of the important thing across all crypto projects is I love the beauty of a lot of the incentive alignment and some of the game theory in all of this, right? And structuring these things, which is always kind of fun to watch, at least from kind of, trying to architect a security mechanism or just in general, like how all this stuff is going to work. Obviously, you guys took your time to set that up, right? It was ChaosNet, the quote unquote beta version of Thorchain for a long time. You guys had some security exploits as like bridges. We've learned so much in the last couple of years as far as like in and out where some of those exploits can happen. I mean, what have you learned, I guess, if you set this up, fixed some of those bugs, taken the time, told everyone, look, this is in beta, don't put all your money in here. Like, how has that over the years kind of played out in a way that you've learned these things and gotten it to where it is now?
Well, I definitely feel like we made the right move early on to launch it as a beta, not to go straight to quote unquote mainnet and just YOLO our way into it and then accept $1 billion in the network day one, which we've seen projects do that, and we've seen them all, oftentimes, lose it all. But that's why we limited in the beginning. We made a lot of really important learnings as part of that process. And so when we had those bugs in the earliest days of that beta, we retooled, we rebuilt entire new teams internally just for the purpose of security. We made these large changes to the network that just give the network ability to protect itself autonomously from somebody trying to exploit it without anybody being part of that. Even if you find an exploit that we don't know about, right, and you try to exploit it, oftentimes you would not be able to extrapolate money out of the network to do so, which is pretty fascinating. We learned a lot of important things around it's important to have a well-documented bug bounty program to help incentivize white hats to come by and fix issues for us. But we always knew that this is one of the most technically complex, one of the most ambitious projects, certainly in the DeFi space, if not in general crypto. And we had to take it slow. We had to take it, intentional. We couldn't just build together in 3 months and then launch it and then whatever happens, happens. We were in alpha for over a year, running on what we call single chain ChaosNet. And then beta ran for about a year, and we weren't mainnet until, a few months ago.
And just to, I guess, maybe translate some of that, when we're talking about mainnet and swaps across different chains, maybe even people don't realize, especially if you're new to the space, Bitcoin is a separate network than Ethereum. It might look like, okay, I can go to Coinbase and buy all these tokens in one spot. They're entirely different networks. So it's not easy to just go from one to the other. And you guys have been slowly, building out what chains you support and how you can swap between all these things. I mean, I guess bigger picture too, like why this matters for any person out there is very similar to banks, right? Is what do you want to do with your crypto assets? And you can store them at a Celsius in a centralized, I guess, quote unquote crypto bank. And we see the risks there. Any bank can fail. And if there's not FDIC insurance or anyone there to come in when times are tough, other than maybe SBF, then, these are risks that people need to consider. And so I guess, you guys have built out the roadmap now. As you add more and more chains, there are more and more opportunities to earn yield on crypto assets, no matter what they are, and swap. And you guys are also working on Thor Savings, which is new,
Yep.
which I assume is even easier for people to understand in terms of just bring your assets, park them here on Thorchain, earn yield.
That's part of the value, I think. I think being a liquidity provider in a traditional like DEX is somewhat complicated. There's a multiple moving pieces to it, and there's impermanent loss, which is a kind of a difficult thing for a lot of people to comprehend. And to understand, oh, am I making money? Am I losing money? Like it becomes very difficult. And I think that's part of the value of what Thor Savings is becoming, is that it becomes more like a savings account in your bank, like in a traditional sense, in that you just put in some dollars and you come back later and there's more dollars than there was before, and there's not much more to it than that. And I think that's the value of this in some sense. Part of the value is that it takes such low cognitive requirements to actually understand what it is and how I make money off of it.
The reason why you're able to do that too is that like they're using your liquidity, right? You're putting money in.
Yes.
If people want to swap, they can swap your money and then it goes somewhere else, and you're rewarded for it.
Right, exactly. The network itself produces income because it provides a valuable service that people are willing to pay money for. I want to swap my Bitcoin to Ethereum, and I'm willing to pay a fee to do so, which is just common to see. And so the network produces just a natural yield from that process, and then we can take that yield and say, all right, well, thank you for providing your Bitcoin to the network. Here's some more Bitcoin, per the fees that are being collected by this network for that purpose. So it's providing a reasonable good for the world to utilize, in which case the world will provide capital for to do so.
How, I guess, as we talk about, the value of Rune also has kind of gone up and down in the waves of the bull and bear market, as all cryptocurrencies do. But I suppose, again, a token that's tied to kind of a real project, providing a real service, always I feel like would come down to adoption, or at least, I guess, the number of dollars or whatever you want to use as the measurement of currency, but the amount of money flowing through Thorchain itself. So I mean, how do you see that kind of adoption process going? What have you seen? And I guess, maybe in the bear market it's tapered off a little bit, but what is the plan there as far as adoption? Because you're right, I feel like a lot of this stuff might be complicated for anyone new to the space to know how to use a wallet, how to store a seed phrase. Yep. What are you seeing now?
Well, so we're starting a process that's going to be a long process, but one that's really important. And so we're recently starting to integrate with other exchanges, with wallet manufacturers. And so people go to their Edge wallet, for example, is a recent wallet that just adopted Thorchain into its UI. And so if you want to swap between Bitcoin and Ethereum on Edge wallet, Thorchain is now behind that. Same thing for Shapeshift. Shapeshift ripped out their back end, threw in Thorchain to replace it, just because it allowed them to do what they want to do without needing to do KYC anymore. We're going to see more of that happening over the course of this year. Nine Realms, especially, has been another team that's associated with Thorchain, has been just banging on that drum for a while now, and they're doing a great job of it.
Yeah, we should get into KYC and what that even means. Know your customer, right? When we're talking about banks and kind of, again, we saw this with Tornado Cash too. I think we're in a new chapter of governments realizing what's happening with crypto, the scale of crypto, and how it's a threat to, I think, the traditional financial system and their control.
For some reason, they don't want to give up that control. I'm not sure why.
Maybe it's not surprising, I suppose. If you're in control, you might not want to give it up. But at the same time, I guess this is kind of the funny thing to crypto native people, and I don't know, if you're in the space, it might not seem like it, or maybe it does. But to me, and I don't know if you'd agree, crypto people generally maybe, I don't want to say neurotic, but very protective of their privacy.
Yes, no, there's definitely a correlation there for sure. I think what's fascinating is that in the meat space, we don't have all that much privacy in a sense, like at least from a finance perspective.
Yeah.
And people have kind of grown in that space, and it kind of seems normal. It seems like it's okay. It seems like, But the thing is that like privacy is actually normal. It's been around for obviously a lot longer than the traditional finances, and it wasn't until recently the traditional finance, like recent in terms of the last 100 years, that we start to lose our privacy within the finance sector. So it is funny. Like I think as an individual, I've become more privacy focused as I've kind of gone deeper down this crypto rabbit hole in some sense. But it makes sense that people want their privacy. To me, that's a basic human right that exists prior to government, and I don't think government should have the ability to take that away from us.
Yeah, it's strange. It's a really weird back and forth that even I have, because it's like, right, anti-money laundering, I suppose might be good. You don't want people to maybe money launder. But the other one, anti-terrorist or terrorism checks on Know Your Customer, might also be good, because you don't want, I guess, we've seen North Korea pretty active in terms of their crypto exploits. you don't want money flowing into like bad things necessarily. And I think there are some things that objectively would be bad. But I mean, it's a sliding scale, as almost everything is in 2022. Everything's on a spectrum, I suppose. And there are pros and cons of some of this.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have cars without car accidents. It's a natural thing to happen. Whenever you invent some new technology that just empowers people on a massive scale, like automobiles or airplanes did or the internet did, there's always some ramification to it, some negative thing that happens. That doesn't mean that we can't do our best to fight against such things, but it's not a good reason to not engage with it. We shouldn't just abandon cars and completely just because people get injured from that.
When we talk about, I guess, the use case of all this and the adoption, what have you seen? Like, what are the actual numbers for where Thorchain sits? We've talked about different measures on, a lot of Coinage chats to track adoption, whether it's total value locked, whether it's actual users, the best ways. How do you kind of look at it? What are the metrics?
I mean, for me, I don't actually look at that too much. I just ship. I think about what the world needs, what would provide significant value, and the adoption I think will just naturally come over time. We can talk about TVL, we can talk about trade volume, we can talk about unique wallets and blah, 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 all these things, but like those things just come and go. Like they're not really strong indicators just because it correlates with things that's unrelating to your network, right? Like just the macro sense of things. Like right now, the trading volume on Thorchain is like per day is like around $20 million, right? Which is a lot lower than it was, pre-Terra collapse, things. It doesn't mean it's because Thorchain's failing as a network or anything like this. It just means that the market's gone pretty bare. I look at more of the fundamentals of like, what is it that we're doing as a project? Are we improving things? Are we making more decentralized? Are we adding new strong features to the network that just improves people's ability to do what they want to do without being, censored or these things? That's the only thing that really matters to me.
I think that's important because we see a lot of maybe biased coverage sometimes in the crypto space. Maybe. And so,
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to get involved with Coinage, because I just felt that there's so much media in this space that is biased, that is shilling, that is non-educated, doesn't look for actual things of substance, but just things that will make numbers go up in some sense. And that's one of the things I appreciate about you, Zach, and about what you're doing here is actually bringing journalism, legitimate, actual, real, quality journalism to this space. Anybody who does that, I would support.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate that. Because, I guess it wasn't an easy decision to jump full on into this, but I think anyone watching this space knows deep down, and we've all been through cycles for a long time. I don't know, I've owned Bitcoin since 2014, so I've certainly seen the waves. I know you've seen the waves. It's like, the builders in this space are so genuine in the way of what they're trying to solve. I've never seen conviction like I have in Web3, and it's just super exciting to kind of have these chats and get into kind of why we're doing what we're doing, because builders actually believe in what they're doing, and they wouldn't spend so much time doing it if they didn't. Yeah. You can talk about decentralization in terms of who's running the Thorchain nodes and what you've seen there. You can talk about, I guess, just generally the community. I mean, how important is that to you as someone who's kind of building a project like this out?
Oh, that's all critically important. It's all part of the road to decentralization, right? And so one of the things we structurally just thought from day one is that we want nodes to be anonymous. We don't want them to be doxxed. They don't want them they can if they choose to. We're not going to yell at anybody who does. But we want the standard to be that nodes are anonymous individuals across the entire world. I don't know who the node operators are. I don't want to know who the node operators are.
For security reasons.
For security reasons, because if you know where they all are, if I know that you're running a node and I'm running a node and they're all running nodes or whatever, we can kind of go some backroom deal somewhere and try to do something that maliciously potentially. Yeah. But in this system, the only way that nodes can actually communicate with each other is just through the public Discord, not even through privately. We have a different mechanism that they can publish and verify to our Discord that they are sending a message, that this node operator, whoever he, she, or they are, can say something, but can only do it in a public forum. It can't do it in a private forum. And that's important just to make sure that there's as most difficult as it possibly can be for nodes to coalesce and have brunch together, which has happened in the Cosmos space. Literally all came together and had brunch, which is just a terrible idea.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who wanted to attack, if you're in a physical location, that's always, maybe that's a more violent way to attack, but I suppose it's also a risk. I mean, when we talk about all this, as far as adoption goes, we had Anatoly from Solana in our studio here in Brooklyn a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about adoption. And adoption, as I said, can be measured in terms of like who's actually paying attention. But I think it's also the lessons that a lot of people talk about when we say like, not your keys, not your coins.
Yeah.
It's like a catchphrase that like was kind of something that maybe if you heard it, you might not understand until the shit hit the fan and you had a lot of centralized exchanges go down, and then it was a real learning lesson for a lot of people. Like, oh, this is what not your keys, not your coins means.
That's the kind of funny thing about like, if you were around from the Mt. Gox days, you learned that back then, like the result of that. But if you just joined crypto after that point, maybe you hadn't learned that lesson yet. So it's like every time we have these bear markets, bull markets, and a whole new influx of people come in who weren't around for the 2017 things and the 2013 events and all these other stuff, then they have, in some sense, they have to kind of relearn the things that the more seasoned individuals have known about. But we'll keep kind of pushing that idea of like not your keys, not your crypto, because it's important.
Well, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, because like you can take it both ways, right? And I guess this is something that SBF has talked about as well, who's also a Coinage Network NFT holder like yourself. But he's mentioned like, if it goes too far, then no one's left as far as like retail users of crypto, because they've been burned. And this year especially bad. If you had money in Celsius or you had money in Terra, those are two huge events that could have destroyed a lot of people this year, to the point where maybe the whole pie shrunk a lot and just said, I don't want anything to do with crypto. Or they could have been like, okay, I've learned a lot of lessons, depending on, I guess, how big the losses were. And you could say that might be a positive in terms of lessons learned. I don't know which one's right, but you'd prefer lessons that are learned in maybe a good way than a bad way.
I mean, self-experience is always a great way to learn something, right?
Yeah.
Success is a terrible teacher oftentimes.
That.
You learn a lot more from failures than you do with successes in some cases. And so, but like, things like Ponzi schemes, that's been around for, hundreds of years, and it'll be around for more hundreds of years, and people just need to learn that sometimes through experience of, when we talk about a pyramid and all these things, that maybe you shouldn't invest into such things. But some people got to learn,
Well, I guess so Anatoly said it's like 1995, where people are understanding not your keys, not your coins. They're learning how to use a wallet, how to sign things. And so I guess in his view of the world, it's 1995 in the early tech days, which means we still have a lot. I think everyone knows we have a long way to go, but it's like checkpointing where we are really in some of the things that crypto is trying to prove. I mean, would you agree with that it's about 95 in like comparing it to the old tech boom? Because like some people might say this year is the big bubble of the tech collapse, just when you look at what's happened to crypto this year.
I mean, I wouldn't say 95. That'd be too early from my perspective. Like in technological adoption, there's something called like an S-curve. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this concept before or not, but it's the idea that the whatever time it takes to adopt the first 10% of people into some new technology, whether it be telephones, internet, or whatever, that amount of time you'll get to 90%. So if you took 10 years, which think about 10 years or 11 years for Bitcoin or the industry to kind of get 10% adoption, which means it's taken approximately another 10 years to get to a 90% adoption of crypto. And so if you look at that mentality, then we're probably not 95, we're probably closer to like 2005. At least my mentality, that's true. But who knows?
Yeah. I mean, no one ever really knows, I guess, as we've all seen, this year play out. But I mean, I guess, you talk about the strength in learning from failures. And I don't know, I guess if you flip that around and be like, there are no such thing as failures, there's only learning opportunities out there. And, you've been at this for years. When did Thorchain start? I actually don't know when the beginning was.
This implementation started in July 2019.
Okay, so it's been a while.
Yeah, been a few years.
What would you say, I guess, are the biggest learnings that you've had on the journey in terms of, everything that could go wrong or did go wrong, and things that you've learned along the ways and things that
Oh
went
my
right?
God, there's been a lot of learnings along the way. Jeez, where do I start? One is that I think people make the mistake is you actually don't need that much capital, right? If you want to start a project like this, Thorchain is probably more extreme because it took a long time to design, architect, and innovate the thing that it does. Mm-hmm. It's unusually long in that sense. But even in Thorchain's case, like initially had like maybe $1.5 million of investment, not $6 billion like we've seen other projects kind of manifest on like day one or whatever. That's just a ludicrous amount of money.
Yeah.
You don't need that much capital. You don't need that much in terms of engineers. You don't need that much in terms of marketing and all these things. Like we only had like 9 or 10 people in the team. Almost every single one of them was a dev. And we just focused on shipping. and just building something that really solves a hair on fire problem.
In the crypto space, I feel like there's a lot of people who sometimes might attack other projects to kind of make theirs look better or something like that.
Yeah.
It's common.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't say necessarily that I have you in my eyes in that camp, right? Because, you know, there's Uniswap, there's a lot of other decentralized exchanges. I mean, how do you look at like the competition in the space? Is it competitive? Is it kind of, you know, we build, they build, we see what happens? But like, how do you view how some of those projects maybe have been able to bring in a ridiculous amount of money, and kind of where you see Thorchain fit into that?
Historically, like Thorchain as a product, we were generally pretty positive towards other. We never like went out and attacked Uni or anything like on Twitter or whatever. Like we've always been pretty positive and supportive. We've even told people we would fund people to fork our code and build another exchange just like it, just because it's better and more healthy for the industry if we have 5 ways of moving across chains instead of, you know, effectively 1. And even though Thorchain's been around for like and actually running and trading assets for over 2 years now, there's still nobody in the industry that does what we do. And there's been many people, other projects that have been trying to fork Thorchain, either fork its code like Maya or just fork its design like Chainflip, but they still haven't launched yet. It's a very technologically complex project and it's hard to even fork. It's not like, you know, forking Uni is pretty easy. It's just a couple thousand lines of code. There's not much going on there. It's just a little bit of business logic. Thorchain is a lot more complicated to understand the inner workings of it, how it all structured and it works. So it's very difficult, not that it's impossible, but it's very difficult to fork, which is why to this day we are the only exchange that actually supports cross-chain swaps in the way we do.
The regulatory piece of that too is also kind of interesting just because, you know, we've talked a lot about why you're so into making sure you don't know who these node operators are and how you don't want to have that information in case any regulator maybe comes after you. You're also one of the rare, I guess, examples to point to in terms of a project and you walking around here in New York. You're here with us in person in our studio in Brooklyn. And like, I wonder if like the regulatory stuff, and I can ask you this as a fellow person who's living in the US, like, as you watch maybe some of these things, I alluded to earlier, but the crackdown now in terms of privacy, Tornado Cash, you know, regulation, the SEC, I mean, where do you see kind of some of those red flags now popping up going in terms of what would happen if maybe Thorchain fell into the crosshairs of regulators? It might not be big enough right now to like be there.
Yeah.
But as we've seen with like other projects, it'd be surprising to kind of know which ones they really do want to like target and go after. And I feel like one that is so dedicated to privacy might be one.
Yes, I mean that's one of the things that the community's been talking about for a long time is adding privacy chains like Monero, for example. And for me, that's important. I think the ability to move in and out of Monero in a decentralized way is critical for the industry as a whole. I think that's a really important thing we should be fighting for. In terms of regulatory things, like whatever happens, happens. But what I know is I don't really pay too much attention to what's happening in the meat space. I don't want to have that kind of influence my decisions about what is right for the industry, what the industry actually needs to be solved.
For everybody listening too on the meat space thing, you keep saying meat space, just to be clear, we're not talking carne asada, we're talking something else.
Well, meat space is just mean by the physical world that you and I are like walking around in,
yes.
rather than the digital one.
Yes,
right?
Of course. Just wanted to clarify in case there were confused, hungry individuals.
Yeah, I'm talking about the butcher down the street.
Heavily regulated meat space.
No, I think the project has always looked about what is the thing that the industry needs, that the people need, that empowers people, that gives them the ability to freely move as they choose and gives them the most self-sovereignty, and then move in that direction. And if there becomes a problem downstream with regulatory issues, then we'll take that on, right? And especially when it comes to privacy things, I am more than happy to take on that fight because it's more than worth it.
How do you look at kind of where we're at and what's ahead for not just Thorchain, but I suppose the crypto space writ large?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we're in a bear market. That's pretty obvious at this point. But I think we've learned a lot from the last one. I'm hoping that we'll continue to learn more. I think bear markets are great because it just allows you to build, right? We're working on really important big features over at the Thorchain project as well, and other communities are also building really important things. So I'm really hoping that you know, fast forward 2-3 years, that the whole industry is going to be just structurally different, and that it can support the industry in a much different way. Hopefully, we can kind of burn away some of the old ideas of just like, you know, fake yield and, you know, poor designs and this stuff, and that they kind of filter themselves out to some regard, and the ones that are structurally, sound, the ones that stick around. And Thorchain is certainly one of those.
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating to watch all of we're all learning in the space together. I think that is one thing that is true, right? And the space is obviously, as kind of a self-policing thing, is often ahead of where regulators are.
Yep.
There are a lot of people who are critical of a lot of projects that failed this year, certainly ahead of the SEC, maybe even hearing the names, right? And so I think that's one important thing to also consider in terms of building and keeping eyes on these things. And again, that's also part of why Coinage wants to exist, is to help kind of flag the learnings along the way with people like yourself that are very smart and have seen this stuff happen and know maybe some of the problems with other projects that certainly I can't catch either. Yeah. But yeah, I think we've covered a lot of everything here. I just want to thank you for coming to our studio.
No, thank you for inviting me.
It's not easy to come all the way to Brooklyn, New York sometimes. People don't understand. There's large boroughs, and this is the largest one of them all.
Yeah, it's a big city, apparently.
It's a big city, but Chad, I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for coming to Coinage Studios here in Brooklyn, and please keep us posted on everything that Thorchain's up to. I'm excited that we got to share this space with your followers, with our followers, and hopefully we can do this again.
Yeah, let's do it again, for sure.
Right on.